Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning's webinar. I'm Chloe Tetro. I am the health coach here with ReadyCare. And for this morning, we are going to do a very deep dive, which is maybe a little too ambitious of me for this hour of the day, on the neuroscience of emotions and the emotions' role in decision making. So it's brief overview, what's happening with the neuroscience of it, the emotion and the decision making. The role of emotional intelligence is something we'll touch on briefly, and then we'll finish up with a few tips for boosting emotional smarts and real world applications. Sometimes we can get stuck in the theoretical land of all of these things, but it's a good way of bringing it down and seeing how is this applicable in everyday life. So jumping straight in, if there's ever any comments, questions, just pop them in. Otherwise, I will just keep talking. Righto, so the neuroscience of emotions. We all have a felt sense, no pun intended, of what emotions are, but really we're going to have a quick look at what is happening under the hood with it. So basically, emotions are described as sentiments or this kind of pie-in-the-sky poetic thing, but really they're a form of a very intricate tapestry of neurochemical processes. I'm like the poet's killer here. It influences almost every facet of our human experience. They shape our thoughts. They'll dictate our actions, which is what we're focusing on today, and they will color our perception, which is very important when we're looking at the decision-making process. So the decision-making process for today will be anything from personal decisions, social decisions, work decisions, lifestyle, dietary decisions. I'll pop in a little bit about that at the end. So at the core, when we're looking at the architecture of emotions, the main player, and every time I'm talking about the brain here, just realize that it's fairly simplified. When I'm talking about regions doing specific things, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But for the sake of brevity, we'll just go with how it is in general. So the main player that we're looking at with emotions and decision making, we mentioned three of them for this morning. So there's the amygdala, which I talk about quite often, and very much because of how it drives us. It's little almond-shaped set of neurons. It'll be dubbed the emotional thermostat of the brain. It assesses external stimuli, it'll gauge it for its emotional significance, and then it'll trigger appropriate responses. So it could be anything at all: laughter, anxiety from deadlines, things that are physical, things that are perceived. The amygdala is going to be involved with it. So it doesn't work by itself. It'll work with the other fella I mention all the time, is the prefrontal cortex. So if you kind of think of it as, in a simplified way, raw emotion, you have the rational counterpart to the amygdala, then raw emotion will be the prefrontal cortex. So it'll take the stimuli and it'll either dampen it or it will respond to it. If you think of it in very simplified terms, as the amygdala is the kind of impulsive, capricious child, and the prefrontal cortex will kind of temper that as the adult. So these two will work with the hippocampus. So this part of the brain is very involved in memory processing. And when we think about emotions, memory is massive with understanding what's really, really happening. So our emotional responses will be tied to events of past experiences, and the hippocampus is providing the context for those experiences. For instance, if you've ever hurt yourself by touching a pan or stove or anything like that, the memory storage will prompt an emotional response the next time you approach a similar scenario. Now, that's very easy when we think of it in terms of, ouch, I just hurt my hand. But if you put that in the real world, that basically means, to put it very, very simply, things that remind you of something that you felt an emotion towards in the past are more likely to trigger a similar reaction. Now, that can get quite complicated when the scenario could be similar, but not quite the same. And all of a sudden, you're left dealing with emotions that may or may not be suitable for the context that they have emerged in. We look at Joseph Ledoux is has produced a book. It's called The Emotional Brain. So for those of you into EQ, which I'll go into in a little bit more, it's absolutely brilliant for that. So he introduces what are called emotional schemas. Now I talk about lattices quite a bit, but essentially they're quite the same. I'm not actually talking about the pastry when I bring it up, though it is kind of the time of day where apple lattices would be on my mind. So they're basically patterns that the brain will use to predict emotional outcome based on those past experiences I mentioned. So instead of reacting to the world in real time, which is what we experience, the brain actually responds via these schemas. So it's making educated guesses based on past data. So it's why even if you're hearing things for the first time, if there's a particular song that comes on the radio, you can get a strong emotional reaction to certain things because it recognizes specific patterns similar to past experiences. And for what we're dealing with regards outdated past emotional responses to similar scenarios, that really comes in quite a bit when we're looking at the decision-making process. So POW, onto emotions and decision-making. So stepping from the kind of the neural web of emotions that we're talking about, these schemas, these emotional schemas, we're kind of at a crossroads with our daily choices. So a common misconception is that their decisions will spring from a kind of logical adult brain, prefrontal cortex is engaged. I am a 30-something-year-old lady. I make decisions based on rationale, but that's absolutely not what's happening. So figurehead in understanding emotional cognition, Antonio Damasio, great name by the way, he's introduced the concept of somatic markers. Somatic meaning the body, and you guys might have heard of that brilliant book whose author escapes me, The Body Holds the Score, which is basically both will talk about how past experiences lodge themselves in us somatically through our bodies. They create emotional signals from our bodies that guide us, often subconsciously, through our choices. So what we're painting here is coming together as we're a lot less in control of the decision-making process than we think that we are, no pun intended. So at the heart of Damasio's theory is the understanding that our decisions are seldom made in a vacuum. They don't just spring out of nowhere. They're informed by lots and lots of past experiences with emotional imprints in the body. They will be the guideposts. They nudge us either away, my somatic memory is fooling me here. So away from certain decisions. So you could get a little bit of anxiety when considering, investments, new roles, a difficult conversation, or they'll bring us towards specific decision makings, like going on holidays, or if you're excited to see somebody, and you go, am I going to do additional paperwork today, or am I going to go visit that person? Your body's going to go, we're going that way. So a lot of our decision making process is really put down to that feeling, that integral feeling that we have in our body, that we are either pushed towards something or we are repelled away from something. And the way that it communicates that through us is through emotional charges in our body. When I'm dealing with clients, when they bring specific obstacles to lifestyle and dietary changes, oftentimes when we get a little bit under the hood of things, there could be particular past experiences that have been tied to, let's say, diet, tied to eating habits, tied to protocols, this kind of formalized approach to eating. And they could have had a really dire experience. It could have brought on things like shame, guilt, I'm not doing enough, I don't feel good enough. And what you find is that the brain starts to process that. It'll go, well, this is also a dietary protocol. The last time I did a dietary protocol, I felt totally rubbish. I felt not good in myself. I felt ashamed. I felt all these really yucky emotions. So as the brain's protection, first of all, it's going to go, we don't like that. We're going to push ourselves away from it. And then because the brain is reacting from past experiences in real time, it will create a narrative to explain your decision after the fact. It will tell you, we don't really have a lot of time for this, or we didn't really like it last time, and sure, there's nothing really wrong with the way that we're doing things now, even though it's making us feel unwell. So it'll create stories for it after the fact. But basically what's happening there is a particular decision has been guided by past experiences, framed through the lens of emotion, and then the brain creates a narrative after the fact. So that is a little bit about the emotions in decision making. You can see I'm running through quite quickly here, so there's a lot to cover. So the role of emotional intelligence, and for those in specific workplaces, EQ became very, very big in the last decade, before that as well, but specifically the importance of emotional intelligence, otherwise EQ, became very, very important in workplace management setting. At its heart, it looked at the synthesis of self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills that come with the understanding of our own emotional landscapes. So another lad to mention is Daniel Goleman. He'd be massive in the field of psychology and behavioral sciences, and was instrumental in bringing the concept of EQ to the forefront of the conversation with it at the moment. It look at self-awareness, as I mentioned, as the cornerstone of emotional intelligence. So cultivating the ability to recognize your own emotions, understand their origins. So again, we're tracing that path backwards. People talk about brain hacking as this kind of like super cool, trendy thing. But basically, if you understand the process of how the brain works, how decision-making works on an emotional basis, quote unquote hacking, just comes from reverse engineering that process. So if you understand your emotions, you understand the past history that they come from, you understand your strong memory triggers towards it, you're now able to part that a little bit from it. You're aware of what it is. You're able to observe it rather than act from it, which is where, mindfulness will come in. Are you able to detach yourself from the emotion, view it, and make informed decisions about, okay, I'm having this emotion. Where did it come from? Okay, I can see that I'm particularly reacting to a coworker, even though it doesn't particularly make sense in this particular context. It's because it's reminding me of a job I had 6 years ago where I was really miserable and I was being bullied in the workplace. And all of a sudden, I'm dragging all of those emotions to this particular scenario, and I'm making emotive decisions based on past experiences that don't particularly suit the context that I'm operating in today. So self-awareness is absolutely massive with anything to do with EQ and decision making. So from this self-regulation, you get the ability to not just recognize, but also manage and modulate your emotional responses. It's very, very different than feeling and reacting and responding totally from an automatic subconscious space. It'll show that Goleman's research will show that people that are more in tune with their emotions can self-regulate better. They're better equipped to handle stress because they'll go, shoop, oh, I'm stressed out of my box. Okay, take a second. What's happening here? Where did this come from? Is this suitable for the reaction that I'm in? They're able to adapt to change better. They can approach challenges with a more solutions-focused mindset. So, as well as regulation and awareness, with emotional intelligence, motivation comes into it quite a bit. So it's shifting the lens from reactive to proactive. It's not just about external rewards, but intrinsic drive. It's about a commitment to people's personal goals and values. So when people develop high emotional intelligence, they often will get a greater sense of vigor. There are a greater sense of the ability to go forward, not just for external validation, but for personal fulfillment. And when your emotions are tied to something that is personally meaningful to you, you're able to harness that pushing towards action. If you can tie your emotions to a goal you want to undertake in your professional career, your social life, your personal development, you're again reverse engineering the knowledge that emotions drive behavior. So all of a sudden, if you tie your goal to something that is exceedingly yummy to your emotions, you really, really understand, what am I going to get emotionally from this task? All of a sudden, your emotional drivers, and people break down the word emotion into emotive motion dynamics. So you're able to move with greater vigor towards a pursuit, and you're hacking your brain's propensity towards push and pull to work for you. So people that have far greater emotional understanding can attain their goals much, much easier than people that don't. Empathy would be another huge part, which is fantastic in the workplace with regards. I mean, I say workplace because, you know, that's the first one that comes to mind in these talks. But I mean, social interaction, friend groups, family dynamics. The ability to cultivate emotional intelligence is the capacity to recognize, understand, and to a degree, caveat, feel the emotions of others. So being able to place yourself in somebody else's emotional shoes. It's the bridge that will connect people. It'll foster understanding. It'll foster compassion. It's the ability to be a good leader, a good friend, a good parent, to have conflict resolution. And again, that decision-making process comes into it from a far more evolved perspective, because you're not just reacting. You're not just in your single lens focus of how am I feeling right now? That is my entire reality. Nothing exists out of it. And my feel, you know, the whole thing of like whatever you're feeling right now, even if it's past experiences led, when people are stuck in that narrow focus of thinking my emotion has sprung up, therefore it is totally the only thing that exists. It's not great for conflict, as we're all probably keenly aware. If there's ever an argument, if you're not able to step outside of yourself and see the other person, conflict resolution does not come into it very well. And your choice from that hyper kind of stimulated cortisol driven, we chatted about the last time, massive stress response decisions, they don't go happily hand in hand together. Okay, so how do we get all of this information and distill it down into real life applications? So self-awareness, as I mentioned, cornerstone. Anything from utilizing apps, Headspace and Calm, things like that. The rationale behind it is being recognizing our emotions and triggers basically enable us to respond instead of react. Getting into a really conscious habit of recognizing your emotions. It's really at the heart of being able to operate your decision-making process, working with your emotions rather than against them. A lot of our processes can happen subconsciously, and when we're not conscious of what is happening, it removes the element of choice in our behaviors. Once we know what's happening, all of a sudden we've gained awareness, we've gained choice. So getting into the practice of using things that help with introspection and cultivating awareness, things like Headspace and Calm, those apps, brilliant to cultivate that focus on emotions. For those who prefer writing, like myself, I've always found it way more cathartic. Maintaining a very, very brief daily emotional journal is not just to recount to yourself, you know, when you're having a day where you think your life is very boring, you take out your journal and you think, I would one day publish this. I mean, if that's your bag, that's great. But really what it is you're cultivating the practice of being able to notice. Noticing brings choice, brings much, much greater depth of decision making that will help you and your goals long term. Second one would be self-regulation. And we chatted a little bit about this as well in the cortisol and stress chat a couple of weeks ago. Emotions are natural. They happen so quickly that, you know, I'm not talking about becoming Spock, that you are void of emotions, but it's more about how we manage them. That's the big difference in our decision-making, positive and negative outcomes. Controlled emotional responses prevent unnecessary conflict, and they will help gain a degree of clarity in your decision making. So taking that pause, knowing that making decisions from a fairly emotionally peaked point is not really conducive to clear thinking. The more cortisol floods your system, the less your prefrontal cortex is on board. So if you remember, that's the kind of rational adult. It's the one that is able to weigh up pros and cons well. It's the one that's able to think long term, not just right now I feel bad. Cultivating empathy, again, the rationale behind that being building deeper connections, fosters trust, collaboration, and understanding on both a personal and professional realm. So how can we develop empathy a little bit better? Engage in deep and open-ended conversations, like make it part of a practice. Even if you are a little bit clunky with emotions, and some people are, choose a person that you trust and say, look, I'm actually trying to get a little bit better at this, and recognizing that these things are skills. You know, if you come from a family where deep, meaningful conversation is part of every dinner, every Christmas, whatever, you've developed a skill over decades, years. If you're in a friend group where that's quite normal to have very, very deep conversations where you look at intention, you look at purpose, you look at what drove decisions, that comes quote unquote naturally to some people, but actually it's a skill that's practiced. If you don't have that in your life, that's totally understandable that you would find these things a little bit more challenging. But do remember that it is a skill. All skills can be made better. All skills can be practiced. So choosing somebody that you trust to say, look, I'm trying this out. I'm doing my best with it, and engage in it as best as you can. Or otherwise, surround yourself in media, whether it be reading, choosing authors from diverse cultures, broadening your emotional horizons, listening to talks that would kind of push you past a particular boundary that you may not yet have broken down yourself. You want to feed your head with a lot of this language, a lot of these ways of thinking. Again, that'll fall into social skills, will become a lot better with these types of things. So I'd mentioned saying, how can this be applied with regards a direct example in practical life? And I mentioned dietary choices, and this is another one that I come across quite often, and in your own life, you're probably quite familiar, where decisions around food can very much be based on emotions. People will describe themselves as emotional eaters quite a bit. So we often think of hunger as just a physical sensation. Sorry, sensation. But our emotional state, of course, will play a huge role in what, when, and why we eat. So when we understand the nuances of sharpening our emotional awareness, we're able to differentiate between what is actual physical hunger and what is emotional hunger. So emotional hunger tends to come on suddenly, usually triggered by a situation, and it's urging us to eat specific comfort foods. Whereas genuine hunger is usually gradual. You'll go, oh, I'm not as sharp as I was. My tummy's a little bit gurgly. I'm feeling a little bit sleepy. So when we recognize a passion of comfort eating, for example, our emotional craving, this will allow us to make more conscious decisions about food intake, for example. If you're reaching for your particular, I'm gonna go back to the apple lattice, which is just that's the one that's come to mind. Once you've developed a higher emotional intelligence, it might prompt you to ask something like, am I actually hungry, or am I just feeling a little bit bleh? And I know that I've always liked eating particular pastries, for example, grew up on them. They remind me of comfort and home and all the different things. So that can shift your behavior quite a bit. And that can lead as an impact, going forward, of just having that practice. And oftentimes people that are emotional eaters are aware that they're emotional eaters, but in the moment, the drive towards, remember we were talking about that push and pull emotion, that drive towards comfort is overriding the kind of longer term decision-making processes. So again, all of these things that I speak about, it's very few people on the face of the planet that are absolutely 100% natural, duck to water with all of these things. A lot of these are practices. These are skills. It's okay to not be great at any of these when you begin. the intention behind wanting to get better at particular things, wanting to try on the hat of, with a bit of curiosity, what would it be like if I just gave this a shot for X amount of time? And most of the time with the brain, repetition creates stronger neural links. Things become easier, behaviors, patterns, actions all become easier with practice. Another, and I'll finish up there in a bit. I'll just give 2 more examples with this on practical applications, would be achieving work-life balances with greater emotional decision-making skills. So where boundaries with work and life blur, maintaining a work-life work-life balance. My words are all over the place this morning. It's really important. Specifically understanding nuances with the emotional intelligence, it will equip us with the ability to be more attuned to our own emotional and physical cues. Recognizing, are we on the verge of stress? Are we on the verge of burnout? And that's another thing we chatted about the last time. I'm like plugging my last talk the whole time here. Recognizing the symptoms of burnout and stress when we're feeling overwhelmed or when we're absolutely doing great. When we leverage that emotional intelligence, we can set clearer boundaries with work. We can ensure we're making time for ourselves and our own personal pursuits. Someone with a higher level of emotional IQ might be very good at understanding, okay, my stress levels have been going up quite a bit. Instead of taking it day by day, putting out the fire, they'll go, I'm recognizing a pattern here. My stress levels have been quite high and I'm going to have to be proactive about this, take some time to recharge, or communicate more effectively with work about the distribution of workload. So instead of putting out fires, being in the seat of, I'm feeling bad, and reacting from that space and not really looking at the bigger picture, which is our prefrontal cortex activated, we can find ourselves kind of diminuting into periods of stress, periods of burnout, things like that. Emotional intelligence, having that little journal or even note in your phone where you just say, this is how I'm feeling for today. And on a kind of broader scale, with regards life at large, finding purposes and passions. So individuals can go through periods of their lives, we all have, where they can feel a little bit lost, a little bit adrift in whether it be their work or their own personal life. When we have finer tuned emotional intelligence, it allows for deeper introspection into what really, really ignites our passion and what aligns with our core values. What are the things that, leverage that, being pulled towards something that you really have a desire to go towards? That's something that you have to allow yourself that period of time in your day to have that introspection for. Lots of different accounts will have highlighted how people, after embracing the ability to cultivate introspection, will have a much greater capacity for transformation in shifts in their own lives, transitioning from unfulfilling jobs to careers that they might love, or redefining their goals to be more in line with their genuine passion and purpose. Someone with a very, very high paying but incredibly stressful job that goes at the end of the day and says, I feel rubbish a little bit now again. What is this? I'll check my journal. Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here of the last 4 months, feeling a little bit rubbish with myself. When they're able to self-reflect, have that degree of awareness, introspection, they're able to see their passions for, let's say, teaching, or make a shift into something that really, really drives them. And at the end of the day, it's life satisfaction we're all striving towards. So anything that can help towards that is a major plus. Right. I've thrown loads your way now on the neuroscience of emotions and emotion and decision making to TLD, or as the kids say. Emotions are predicated on past experiences through our brain or memories. We can sometimes have emotional responses based on those past experiences that don't really fit the context of where we're at and can sway our decision making. If we cultivate a very good sense of self-awareness and reflection, it allows us to make better long-term decisions. There are specific practices mentioned in this talk that you can bring as a skill to deepen and develop those emotional intelligence skills. I hope you enjoyed my little chat for today. Any comments will be appreciated, and we will see you guys next time. We'll see you later now. Bye.